Hi everyone. Today we're going to continue our conversation on factoring. In the last lesson we covered factoring with GCF, which were these examples here. Today we're going to talk about this factoring trinomials piece. So we're going to do this next section of examples. So remember that factoring is really all about turning something into a multiplication problem. And we talked about how with these examples up here, this was like the reverse distributive property. So I was pulling things out. Like, for example, I believe in this one, I pulled out a 3. And then on the inside, I wrote down everything that was left over. Okay, so that if I were to distribute that 3 back in there, it would turn back into the original. Okay, so it's like doing the distributive property in reverse. This section that we're covering today, the factoring trinomials, this is going to be like reverse FOIL. So if you remember when we used to have, like for example, let's see, x plus 1 and x plus 5, let's say. Okay, and we did FOIL. We did x times x and got x squared. And then we did, let's see, on the outside I would have 5x. On the inside I would have 1x. And then last I would have just a 5. And so this would become x squared plus 6x plus 5. What I'm looking at today is how do I start with something like what you see down there on the bottom of that example I just worked through and turn it back into the 2 parentheses. So how do I start here and come up with these 2 parentheses? Okay, and so what we're really going to be focused on is the relationship between these numbers and these numbers here. And what I'm hoping that you see, and maybe a 1 wasn't the greatest example because that one I don't think is as obvious, but that if I take these 2 numbers and add them together, 1 plus 5 makes 6, because look at what happens when you FOIL right here. Those 2 numbers get added together and they turn into that middle term. And then the last term comes from multiplying them together. Okay, so we are always going to be adding to get to this middle number and multiplying to get to this number on the end. And again, what we're looking for is something like this. We're looking for 2 parentheses that I could multiply together that would turn back into that trinomial. Okay, a lot of arrows there. Sorry about that. So when I look at this first example here, x squared plus 5x plus 6, I want to find 2 numbers that multiply to make 6 and add to make 5. And my hope is that most of these you can just come up with off the top of your head. But if you can't, I'm going to show you a strategy in a minute for how you could make a list to find the numbers you're looking for. But for this one, I hope 2 and 3 are jumping out at you, because 2 times 3 makes 6, 2 plus 3 makes 5. So correct answer here would look like this: x plus 2 times x plus 3. And if I were to FOIL to check it, and you don't necessarily have to write this out every time, but it's a good idea to at least do it in your head, I would end up with x squared. Here I would have 3x, and here I would have 2x, so that would be 5x. And then at the end, 2 times 3 would make 6. And so that does match what I started with up there. Okay? But again, what's in blue is what your actual answer is. And that is a multiplication problem. I turned it into something times something. So now let's look at that next one. This time I want to multiply to make 32 and somehow add to make negative 18. So before we dive into the numbers, let's think about how do we multiply and get a positive number, but add and get a negative number? And if we were in class, I would make you actually answer me, but I hope that you're thinking using 2 negatives, because if I have 2 negatives, when I multiply them, they become positive, but when I add them, they stay negative. Okay, so my 2 numbers in my parentheses are going to be both negative. Now, maybe you don't know the things that multiply to make 32 off the top of your head. And by the way, that's kind of where I always start. I start with this number and think of all the ways I could multiply to make 32, and then I find one of those combinations that would make an 18 there in the middle. So here's what you can do, and some of you may have it already. Some of you may know it off the top of your head, and that's fine. Like I said, I want to give you a strategy that would work if you didn't know it off the top of your head. I kind of go off to the side, and I make a list of all the ways to multiply to 32. And I kind of demonstrated this in the last lesson, in the last video. But so I go 1 and 32, 2, and if you need a calculator to help you out here, that's okay. 32 divided by 2 is 16. 3 does not go into 32, but 4 does. 4 and 8. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. And if you weren't sure about any of those, you could check them on a calculator. 7 doesn't work. And then my next one is 8, which is already on the list. So looking at these 3 options, I need an option that also adds to make 18 in the middle. So 2 and 16 is what I want to go with. And then remember we said they both have to be negative to make that negative 18. So I'm going to do x minus 6 times x minus 16 and x minus 2. And that would be my factors. Okay. So now take a look at this next one. This time I need to multiply to make a negative. Okay. So as soon as I see that I'm trying to multiply to make a negative, whenever this thing is negative here, I know that that means my 2 parentheses are going to be opposite signs. Meaning one's going to be a plus and one's going to be a minus. Because the way that you multiply to get a negative 36 is by using one positive and one negative. The thing that's a little bit tricky about that is you also have to take that into consideration when you go to add them together. That if you have one positive and one negative and you add them, it really is more like subtraction. So I'm going to make a quick list over here for 36. So 1 and 36. I've got 2 and 18. 3 and 12. 4 and 9. 5 does not go into 36, and then 6 and 6. And anytime you've got a duplicate like that, if it's already on your list, then you know you've got the complete list. So these are my only options. These are the only ways to multiply to make 36. I have to somehow come up with a way to make them add to 5, keeping in mind that I'm going to use one positive number and one negative number. So knowing that, 4 and 9 are what I want to go with. Because 4 and 9, if I make the 9 positive and the 4 negative, positive 9 plus negative 4 leaves me with positive 5. Now, notice up here in these ones, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to which number I threw down first. So if you had written like x plus 3 and then x plus 2, or if you had written x minus 2 and then x minus 16, that wouldn't matter. The order does not matter because this is multiplication and it doesn't matter what order it goes in. The same thing technically goes here. Okay, I could have put x plus 9 second and then I could have put x minus 4 first. But it is important that you put the right sign with the right number. So positive 9 and negative 4 leave you with positive 5. If I had made the 9 negative and the 4 positive, that wouldn't have given me a positive 5 in the middle. It would have given me a negative 5. So these ones with the mismatch signs, the ones where the 2 signs do not match each other, you have to be really careful that you're putting the right sign with the right number. And so it's very important that you take this step. Again, I don't care if you write them down on your paper, although that's not a terrible idea when you're first starting. But at least in your head, run through this multiplication and go, okay, so this would give me 9x, this would give me negative 4x, 9x and negative 4x make that positive 5. Okay, and then 9 times negative 4 gives you the negative 36. X times x gives you x squared. Okay, so on this next one, first thing I'm going to do is make sure you understand that that's a 1 there, right? That's a negative 1x. So I need to multiply to make negative 42. And just like in this one up above, if it's a negative sign here at the end, I know I'm going to be dealing with a plus and a minus. Okay, should probably point out up here, anytime this number at the end is positive, like these first two, you know that your signs are going to match. They're either both going to be pluses or both going to be minuses, okay? Because that's how you multiply to get a positive. If it's negative on the end, that's when you have a one of each situation, and that's when you have to be a little more careful about how you place your numbers. So how do I multiply to 42 and subtract to make 1? And this one, I threw this example in here because this one always throws everybody off. They somehow want to use like one like this. They want to do like 1 and 42. But I need numbers that when I subtract them, they're going to have a difference of 1. So how can we multiply to make 42 with a difference of 1? Okay. Well, here's my 42 list. Hopefully you're trying to come up with the answer. Hopefully you can beat me. 1 and 42, 2 and 21. 3 times 14 makes 42. 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, 6 and 7, and then 7 would be next, and that's already on my list. So using one of these combinations, I need to somehow make a -1 in the middle. This right here is going to be my best bet. 7 and 6, okay? If I want it to come out to be a -1, just think carefully about which one of these things you want to be negative. I'm going to make the 7 negative. So -7 plus +6 would leave me with a -1. So I'm going to do a +6 and a -7. And again, I'm going to cross-reference that in my head. I'm going to just double check. 6x, -7x, I would get that -1x. 6 times -7 would give me the -42. Okay, so the next one looks a little bit different. And I didn't really refer to this in any of the other ones, although I probably should have been checking for it. But this last one here, whoops, sorry about that, guys. This last one here, notice how it doesn't just start with a plain old x squared. This one should sort of look like what we did up here at the top of the page with factoring by GCF. This one has a greatest common factor that I can pull out of all of these. So I'm going to start with that. And really you should check that every time. Although if it just starts with an x squared, chances are there's not a GCF for you to pull out. But this one, I'm going to pull out a 3x, okay? Because they all have an x in common, they all have a 3 in common. That's going to leave me with an x squared here. That's going to leave me with a 10x here. And then 72 divided by 3 is 24, so that's going to leave me with a +24. Okay, now I can take this thing and factor this again. I can take another step with this piece that's left inside the parentheses. So this problem is kind of a combination between the top section and bottom section on this page. I'm going to take this and take another step. So I'm going to set up those parentheses again. X and x. I'm going to look here first and see that this is positive. So that means my two signs are going to be twins, right? It's either going to be plus plus or minus minus. Then I'm going to look here and I see that this is negative. So if I want to multiply and get positive, but add and get negative, that's going to be similar to the second example up here. I'm going to use two negatives, okay? And now I need two numbers that multiply to make 24 and add to make 10. Okay, so multiply to 24, run through those options in your head. Hopefully you're going to come up with 6 and 4. And because they're both negative, it doesn't really matter which one you put in which parenthesis. If you put the 4 first, that's okay because they're both going to be minuses here. The big thing with these problems is you also have to remember that that 3x is part of your answer. You always want to write your answer in a way that if I multiplied it back together, I would get back to the original. And if I leave that 3x out of there, I would not get the original answer back. So I broke it down into the two parentheses and then took my GCF and left it up front. So this right here is what my final answer would look like. Okay, that's it for this section. Hopefully, I know that was kind of lightning fast there, but that was enough to get you started. The first assignment you're going to do with this material has the problems really nicely separated, where all of the ones with the plus at the end are together, and then all of the ones with the minus at the end are together. Okay, so you don't have to sort them out a whole lot. The second assignment you're going to do is all mixed up, and then it's toward the end it starts to throw in this type of problem too. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Give these a try. And these are really, really easy to self-check and know if you got the answer right. Okay? All right, thanks a lot.